Amen. By way of refresher from last week, because I know not everyone's here each time, and I didn't make any notes, so I'm going to do this off the top of my head. We were talking last week about Jehoiakim, who was the second son of Josiah who was put on the throne. He was the oldest one as far as we know at the time. Johanan, we don't know what happened to him. His younger brother, Jehoahaz, was on the throne for 3 months and then was taken into captivity to Egypt, never heard from again. Jehoiakim, we're going to look at his end tonight, and then we're going to look at the reign of his son. Last week I had a few what do we do with this in 2022 questions. Looking at my notes today, a lot of this is just going to be history, but there is going to be one very significant what do we do with this today question, so be waiting for it when it gets here. Let's turn to 2 Kings chapter 24, and we will look at the end of Jehoiakim as it's recorded in 2 Kings. Starting in verse 1, we read that Jehoiakim was and this is recap again, Jehoiakim was the servant of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, for 3 years. Then he saw an opportunity to rebel, verse 1 tells us, and he rebelled against him, and therefore there were a bunch that came up against his area that he still commanded, that is in Judea. And verse 3 says, surely at the command of the Lord it came upon Judah to remove them from his sight because of the sins of Manasseh, according to all he had done for the innocent blood which he shed, that's Jehoiakim, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord would not forgive. That's how the Kings record it. Let's go to Chronicles. Chronicles 36. It tells us a little bit more, starting in verse 5. He said he was 25 when he became king, reigned 11 years, did evil in the sight of the Lord. Nebuchadnezzar came. We talked last week about how he bound him with chains to take him to Babylon, but there's no record that he ever did take him to Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar took some of the articles out of the house of the Lord to Babylon at this time and put them in the temple at Babylon. There's some thought that those are the articles that were being used the night that Belshazzar, I didn't go look at this, but in the book of Daniel chapter 5, the king brings out some of the articles from the temple in Jerusalem and is using them like common china for a party that he's having. We're in 2 Chronicles 36 at the moment, for those that just came in. In verse 8, it tells us that he did abominations, and they're written in the book of Kings of Israel and Judah, and Jehoiachin became the son in his place. What we're not seeing here in these two brief records is that Jehoiakim was, for lack of a better word, if the prophecy we're going to read in Jeremiah in just a moment is correct, he died and was thrown over the wall. Did not get a ceremonial burying like a lot of the kings. Let's go to Jeremiah 22. Starting in verse 18. This is the prophecy about Jehoiakim. And while it doesn't tell us specifically in either of those readings what happened, I believe the prophecy came true. Jeremiah 22:18, he says, thus says the Lord in regard to Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, they will not lament him. Alas, my brother, alas, my sister, they will not lament for him. Alas for the master, alas for his splendor. He will be buried with a donkey's burial, dragged off and thrown out beyond the gates of Jerusalem. And I happen to believe that's exactly what occurred when Jehoiakim died. The siege was on at Jerusalem. The people were not free to come and go out of the city. And one of the commentaries that I read, it may have been based on one of the histories, is that when Jehoiakim died, either by natural causes or by someone hitting him in the head with a club or whatever, which it's totally natural to die when that happens to you as well, they threw him overboard so that the Babylonians that were seizing the city could see that the king was dead. But that didn't satisfy Nebuchadnezzar, as we will see as we get back to Jehoiachin. He's just tossed over. Unceremoniously, not buried with the respect that we see on a lot of the instances where a king dies and the country mourns. No one's saying alas or oh no, he died or anything like that. It was a welcome relief for the people in Jerusalem when Jehoiakim died. So now, any thoughts, questions, or comments about anything we talked about tonight or last week about Jehoiakim that came to your mind? No. He was 25 when he took the throne. He reigned for 11 years, so it's been 36-ish. Not necessarily. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. And when you say Jeconiah, it's the same one I'm calling Jehoiachin, I believe. Okay, then let's go to the son. Let's go back to 2 Kings 24. Because what's recorded in Chronicles about Jehoiachin is very brief. We get more in 2 Kings 24, starting in verse 8. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king. We'll stop right there because Mark said, was he 8? If you're reading the Chronicle account, it does say that he's 8 years old, but it says 18 in Kings, and again, to whatever stock you can put in what commentaries and those who have studied it have said, they believe that the difference in an 8 and 18 in Hebrew is like a dot that may have been misplaced in some of the translations. Most of the commentaries believe that he was 18 at the time because of what is said about him. When he became king, he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Natasha. He did evil in the sight of the Lord according to all that his father had done. And if he was shedding innocent blood in Jerusalem the way his father was doing it, I don't think he was 8 years old. I'm leaning more toward the 18. Verse 10, at that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon went up to Jerusalem and the city was under siege. Now that siege lasted a long time. Nebuchadnezzar, verse 11, came to the city while his servants were besieging it. Jehoiachin, unlike his father, recognized the situation. Verse 12, he went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and his captains and his officials, and the king of Babylon took him captive in the 8th year of his reign. That's the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. He carried out of there all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and cut into pieces the vessels of gold which Solomon the king of Israel had made in the temple of the Lord, just as the Lord had said. It had been prophesied that if you guys don't straighten up, the Lord passed through his prophets, if you don't straighten up, this place is going to be devastated. The whole land and the temple. Here it is. Verse 14, and he led away into exile all of Jerusalem and the captives and the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, all the craftsmen and the smiths. None remained except the poorest people in the land. Now think about that for a second. You come into, let's just say Greenwood. And I realize we've got roads that go to Fort Smith, but forget that for a minute. You come to Greenwood and you take out the doctors, the dentist, those that know how to run heavy machinery. You take out those who know how to run the garbage trucks. You take out those that know how to run the water plant. You just take out everybody who has any kind of skills. Greenwood Tire gets closed. All the tire shops get closed. All the mechanics are gone. What's going to happen to Greenwood? And don't say we'll all go to YouTube videos and figure it out for ourselves. That's not an option here. they left in charge, or left the people there who were the least able to maintain a society. And they did it for a reason. So they couldn't maintain their society, which had been rebellious to Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 15, he led Jehoiachin away into exile to Babylon, also the king's wives, plural, which is another reason why I believe he was 18 and not 8, because he had plural wives at that time. His officials, the leading men in the land, they were led away into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. As an aside, this may have been the time that Daniel was led into exile. Could have been a little bit earlier, could have been at the end of Zedekiah's reign, but my inclination is this is probably when Daniel was led away. And again, the men of valor, 7,000. Those are soldier types. The craftsmen, the smiths, 1,000, all strong and fit for war. He took them to Babylon so they couldn't wage war against him in Jerusalem. Then the king of Babylon, verse 17, made his uncle Mattaniah king in his place and changed his name to Zedekiah. You'll recall when Pharaoh Necho made the first son of Josiah king, he changed his name to Jehoahaz. No, I'm sorry. It was Jehoiakim. He changed his name. He took Jehoahaz captive. So mark it right there. We're going to stop. I'm not going to talk about Zedekiah just yet, because there's a little bit more I want us to talk about Jehoiachin. And I thought that I had that in form that it would come up one at a time. So only look at the lines I'm talking about. Most of our study has been, see, Mark's looking down, he's looking at the whole thing. Most of our study here has been about what Jeremiah had to say, had to reveal. But I found a writing in Ezekiel I want us to look at. Go to Ezekiel 19. Now, side note, for those that don't remember or have never heard, Jeremiah and Ezekiel are roughly contemporaries, except Ezekiel was taken to Babylon, and his prophecies are done from the exile. He is in Babylon with the others that we just talked about. He may have been one of those nobles or mighty men or whatever that was taken away. But he had something to say about what was going on back in Jerusalem. In fact, Jeremiah may have gone in the first of the times that Nebuchadnezzar led people away. Starting in verse 1, as for you, take up a lamentation for the princes of Israel and say, what is your mother, a lioness among lions? She lay down with young lions, she reared her cubs. Thinking is that the lion they're talking about here is Judah. When she brought up one of her cubs, he became a lion, and he learned to tear his prey, he devoured men. Then nations heard about him, he was captured in their pit, and they brought him with hooks to the land of Egypt. Which one is that I'm talking about? Yeah, they all start with the J. Jehoahaz, the first one that was there for 3 months. That was the one that was taken into Egypt and was never heard from again. When she saw, verse 5, as she waited that her hope was lost, she took another of her cubs and made him a young lion. And he walked about among the lions. He became a young lion. He learned to tear his prey. He devoured men. Now you might think that's Jehoiakim, the one that reigned for 11 years, but read on. He destroyed their fortified towers. He laid waste their cities, and their land and their fullness was appalled because of the sound of his roaring. Then the nations set against him on every side of their provinces, and they spread their nets over him. He was captured in a pit. They put him in a cage with hooks and brought him to the king of Babylon. They brought him in hunting nets, so his voice would be heard no more in the land of land of Israel. Some of the commentaries think this is Zedekiah. I'm more inclined to believe that it's Jehoiachin, the one that came out and surrendered. When he surrendered, I'm guessing they didn't say, okay, you just stand over there. I am of the opinion that he was put in what we would call handcuffs and was taken to Babylon in captivity, which we're going to read about as we get to the end of this session today. Now, Let's go to Jeremiah 22 again. We stopped there and we were looking at Jehoiachin. But we need to go back to Jeremiah 22 now to read about Jehoiachin. And that picks up in verse 24. And here you start thinking, because here's the one where I'm going to say in a moment, what's the significance of this for us today? Verse 24 of Jeremiah 22. As I live, declares the Lord, even though Coniah, and I've got on the first slide that he is known by Jehoiachin, Coniah, and Jeconiah, and you pronounce it another way. Just like Simon was Peter, was Cephas, some of these people have different names, and Coniah is the same one, because he's the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Even though he were a signet ring on my right hand, yet I would pull you off. And I would give you over into the hand of those who are seeking your life. Yes, into the hand of those who you dread, even the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and into the hand of the Chaldeans. I will hurl you and your mother who bore you to another country where you were not born, and there you will die. This is prophecy. This is before he took the throne. But as for the land to which they desire to return, they will not return to it. So those that went in captivity under that one that we talked about in 2 Kings 24, they're not coming back. Now, look at 28. Is this man Coniah a despised, shattered jar? Is he an undesirable vessel? Why have he and his descendants been hurled out and cast in a land they had not known? O land, 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 hear the word of the Lord. Says the Lord, write this man down childless, a man who will not prosper in his days. For no man of his descendants will prosper sitting on the throne of David or ruling again in Judah. Some of you did not take my instructions. You've already read the next line. Turn to Matthew 1. Matthew 1 is the genealogy of Jesus. And when we get to verse 10, it says, Hezekiah was the father of Manasseh, Manasseh of Amnon, Amnon the father of Josiah. Josiah became the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. Those of you that have read ahead know that if you go all the way to 16, you read that this is the lineage that traces to Jesus. So Coniah is in the lineage of Jesus. What's the significance of that for us today? It's very significant to us today. Mark?
Well, because none of his descendants, he went childless.
Yeah, well, he didn't actually. He had children, but he says mark him down as childless.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sit on the throne.
None of them will sit on the throne. That would
David's throne.
will not sit on David's throne. That includes, go to verse 12. Zerubbabel. When we get to the study of Ezra, we're going to see that name again. The grandson of Jeconiah or Jehoiachin was named the governor of the region, but he wasn't the king. And you read on down the rest of those names, many of which we don't have record of in the Bible, and you get down to the last one. Jesus was born who was called the Messiah. According to Jeremiah, none of Coniah's or none of Jehoiachin's descendants can sit on the throne in Jerusalem. None of them. So what's the significance to us today that Jesus cannot sit on the throne in Jerusalem? Cindy's got it already. What's the significance? The 1,000-year reign. You hear the premillennialists say Jesus is coming back to earth and he's going to set up on the throne of David in Jerusalem and reign for 1,000 years. I don't think so, for several reasons. One of which is what we're told in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 about how when Jesus comes back, he'll be in the air, and those that are his, the dead first and then those living, will go and meet him in the air and be with the Lord forever. There's no 1,000 years there. You have to do a whole lot of ignoring some verses and twisting some of the visions to come up with a 1,000-year reign as it's recorded in Revelation 20. You just got to ignore a whole lot of things. But the main thing you've got to ignore is that Jesus Christ, a descendant of this man, Jehoiachin, cannot sit on the throne of David in Jerusalem. Can't happen. And it's almost as though the Holy Spirit knew that at some point in some time there are going to be folks trying to put Jesus on David's literal throne, and he made sure in Jeremiah 22 to tell us it's not going to happen. It just isn't. So that's what you do with this today, is you hear someone talking about the reign of 1,000 years of Jesus in Jerusalem, sitting on the throne of David, reestablishing that kingdom. You can either correct them or you can giggle, whichever you want to do, because they don't know what they're talking about. It's not going to happen. Thoughts, questions, or comments? Don't giggle. I was being facetious. Because it's a serious thing. The premillennial doctrine has a whole lot of other elements to it. And to be fair, for me to say a premillennialist believes A, B, C, and D, you can't do that. They have different beliefs within that system. Some believe the rapture is going to happen at one point of their beliefs. Some think it'll happen toward the end. But a lot of it has the second chance element to it. And that is that those who rejected Jesus, after they're called up in the rapture, then who's left goes through this big tribulation, and then they've got another chance to obey, kind of thing. I don't know why anybody would want to bring Jesus back to this earth. I mean, he'd been here once. I don't know why they'd want to bring him back.
Well, a major tenet in that doctrine is that the Lord wanted, or God wanted to establish his kingdom first.
Yes.
And sinful man ordered on
Yeah, if you didn't...
one of the immediate things that you think of is, well, I want to serve God and man get over. So there are a lot of different tentacles, if you will, in that doctrine, and this is it's interesting to me that that's a major part of the first part of Peter's sermon in Acts 2, the kingship business. David's still buried over there.
Right. David's still buried, and yet Jesus is a king. Go figure. And as Mark said, that the part of the doctrine is that, well, now I've forgotten what you were saying. I was going to say it for those in the back. What was the first part that you said?
Well, he wanted the Lord.
Oh, the failure. Yeah, that Jesus, when he came and was living on earth, that the idea was that man would accept him and put him on David's throne without going through the crucifixion thing, but they had to go to plan B because man rejected him. And as Mark eloquently put it, who wants to serve a God that man can thwart like that? Okay, so Jehoiachin is in captivity. Bye-bye Jehoiachin, but we're not done with him. As you can see on the board, 2 Kings 25. We'll be starting in verse 27. It's interesting when you read Ezekiel that when he mentions in the year of, sometimes he talks about in the year of our captivity, but sometimes he mentions in the year of King Jehoiachin. Even while he was in captivity in Babylon, he's still recognized by Ezekiel as the king. Let's read in verse 27. Oh, no, let's back up a second. The first of Josiah's sons was taken away to Egypt, and as far as we know, died there. We never heard from him again. The second son, Jehoiakim, was, according to Jeremiah, thrown over the wall, dead, at the hands of his people or just of other causes, we don't know. Now we come to Jehoiachin, who reigned 3 months, surrenders to Nebuchadnezzar, taken away to Babylon. It came about in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, the king of Judah. See, you still call the king. In the 12th month, and it tells you the whole timeline there, that evil Merodach, the king of Babylon, in that year he became king. He released Jehoiachin, king of Judah, from prison. And he spoke kindly to him and set his throne above the throne of the kings who were with him in Babylon. He changed his prison clothes and had his meals in the king's presence regularly all the days of his life. And for his allowance, a regular allowance was given to him by the king, a portion for each day, all the days of his life. Why did he do that? Yeah, we don't really know. We're not told exactly why that happened that way. Sorry, Butch, you took your answer. We don't know. We know what's said, and for whatever reason, after 37 years, it says the 37th year of the exile, if he was 18 at the time, and I'm doing my math right, he's 55 at this point, and he spent 2/3 of his life in a Babylonian prison. And then all of a sudden, he's eating at the king's table and getting an allowance, apparently able to roam free at this point. I doubt very seriously he came to the king's table to eat, and then the guards say, okay, back to jail for you. I think he got a place to live and lived out the rest of his days in relative comfort in Babylon. And we don't know why. It's one of those things that we'd like to know, but we just don't know why. Okay, thoughts, questions, or comments about anything that we've talked about tonight? Grant. About the why? Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Speculation's as good as anything else.
Still kind of looking at David C. Bonner. The book of Kings ends on a hopeful note. The judgment of exile will not destroy the people of Israel or the line of David. God's promise concerning David's house remains.
The house remains. Well, we go to Matthew, and the lineage of David certainly remains. So in that respect, you could say the house of remains. And as I mentioned, when it came time to install a governor, not a king, not a vassal king, but a governor in the region, when the Medo-Persians let Ezra and the others go back, Zerubbabel, the grandson of the man who was in captivity for 37 years before he was released, became that governor. So there was something about that family that was recognized even by the outsiders. Forget Ezekiel for a second, counting time by his reign, the 3 months plus 37 years. Something about the Babylonians recognized that family. Any other thoughts? Okay, let me get you prepped then for next week. Next week, we're going to start looking at Zedekiah. Zedekiah was the last king in Judah. We're going to look briefly at Jeremiah 27 and 28, because those are some prophecies at the first part of Zedekiah's reign and some instructions that he had. And then we're going to turn to chapter 37, and for the rest of the time that I'm here, we're pretty much going to be going 37 through 44, I think, maybe 45, I don't remember, and just taking it kind of bit by bit. And those of you that want to read ahead, you can glance through 27 and 28. We're not going to spend a lot of time there. But 37, we're going to start looking at the prelude to the fall. What happened right before Jerusalem fell. Then we'll have a look at what Jeremiah records about what happened during the fall. And then we'll look at the aftermath of the fall. And then finally, the last part of Jeremiah that we're going to be looking at is the flight from Jerusalem. Those who were left behind decided it was time to get out of not Dodge, Jerusalem, and they left. So that's the outline. It's going to take 3 or 4 weeks to get through this. So, yes.
If I've got time, I'll try to do a little research on how far back the puppet kings of the Edomite lineage go, the Herods.
Right.
Because that's what we're dealing with when you get to Roman rulers. They don't even have what you consider a native born king per se. Well, I say born Edomites were from that area.
Yeah, but they certainly were not of the.
Stretch or connection.
Mark was talking about the Herods during the days of Christ and how they were called king because the Roman emperors allowed them to be called that, but they were not of the lineage of David. They were Edomites, which makes them, the line of Esau, not of Isaac. Okay, if there's nothing else, be very quiet. Don't disturb the classes.